Now, welcome to World Chef's podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar Fredriksson, and you're listening to World on a Plate. Amazing things happen when we eat together. Now, what if everyone in our community had access to great food and people to eat it with? Now, joining us on this podcast is the director and general manager of the Long Table, Will North. Today, we'll be discussing the Long Table. It's a community-driven initiative and a restaurant that operates on a pay-as-you-can model, making food accessible to everyone, regardless of means. So, we'll delve on how they're addressing the food security with a radical hospitality model. So, welcome to the show, Will. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ragnar. Well said. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Long Table origin. Tell us a little bit. So what started? What was the creation, and what inspired you? What inspired the whole concept behind this restaurant?
Well, I'd love to say it was my inspiration, but that would be lying. So I joined the Long Table about 4 years ago. But in 2018, my colleague Tom Herbert and another Will called Will Mansell, who founded the Long Table together, um, ultimately we're just seeing people not being able to access food and not be able to access good food, but also fundamentally eating alone. And the food that they were eating in the circumstance they were eating, they didn't feel were acceptable in the day and age. I'm looking out on some valleys of the beautiful Cotswolds here, and we have huge issues around food security for people, here. So if we have it here, imagine, places where people aren't as well off or accepted. So it kind of started from that, really. And very early days, Tom, probably very illegally, we're against environmental health, I think, in the UK, pulled a barbecue inside and pulled some tables together from one of our sister organizations, which is the Furniture Bank, and decided to cook lunch for everybody. And continued to do this, and then thought we'd invite people. And slowly but surely, we've been from feeding 20 people a staff lunch to the last financial year feeding 35,000 people pay as you can.
Wow.
And growing even more. We've got a second restaurant opening, and we're looking at maybe doing 45,000 people this year in our first restaurant. And yeah, it's very exciting, but also very terrifying.
So the practice, it's sort of a radical approach, as I mentioned earlier, and so pay as you can. At the same time, I mean, you have full staff, full-time members of staff, and wages to be paid, and there is no volunteer. So tell us, how is this model possible?
It's tough, right? It's fundamentally, that's my job, to try and make it work. And I really don't know what I'm doing, but if anyone tells you they do know what they're doing, they're lying. And that's kind of the way. You've just got to kind of trust and give it a go, right? In the UK, where we're based, you have your traditional businesses, your LLCs, PLCs, things like this, sole traders, and then you also have charity. But we also have a thing in the middle, which is called social enterprise. So the Long Table itself is a community interest company. Ultimately, what that means is it's the mind of a business and the heart of a charity. So we trade. That's really important, that we trade, and we make sure that everyone in the food chain gets paid. But if it costs us £100 to pay for everything we do, when we make £1 profit, legally we have to reinvest that back into the work we do.
Exactly.
So that's kind of the structure of it. I know some countries don't have that structure, but in the UK we do. So for us, what that means is we don't wait to make profit. What we do is we pay for our social outputs before we make profit. So last year we turned over about £500,000, and it cost us £500,000 to do. But of that £500,000, £120,000 was kind of reinvested back into making sure that everybody can come and eat at our table, whether they have the means or not. And making those book balances is very difficult and terrifying sometimes. Kind of in the past, when we first started, we would access grant funding or things through National Lottery or charity funding, because you can access that in the CIC space. But we realized about 2-3 years ago, when I kind of took over as a general manager and director of the Long Table, there's very little long-term sustainability in that model. Funders change. It becomes very complicated. And so for us, it's around, and the journey we've had over the last 3 years is to become self-sustaining. It might be quite hard to hear to some of the people listening to this podcast in the industry. You've got to think about profit differently.
Mm.
You really do. And that took me about 6 months to really get my head around. I'm never going to become rich doing what I do here, but I have worked in the hospitality industry for the part, well, since I was 14, and I'm 36 now. And I've never felt so in love with this industry in doing what we do here. I think a lot of people come to this industry because they want to serve, or they want to create, or they want to welcome people in. But the very nature of this industry means that if you would need to return money to yourself as like a chef patron or shareholders, you can't have everybody at your table. You just can't. In the UK, and I'm sure around the world, eating at restaurants has become a luxury.
Mm.
And most people who get into this job want people to come into their restaurants, right, and eat with them. But the very nature that they just can't. You cannot welcome everybody in. So if that's the problem, how do we fix it? We fix it by saying, well, if we want to answer our question of what if everyone in our community had access to great food and people to eat it with, we have to make that food pay as you can. And that means whether you've got 1p, whether you've got nothing, whether you've got £50 to pay towards a meal, that is the cost. And that is the price that we ask you to pay. We ask you to pay what you can afford. Alongside that, we have an amazing bar. We've got great coffees, great cakes. We have an amazing event. And all of those things have a cost to them, but it's not like your coffee's a tenner because your food might have been free. And what it does is when you open up your table to this, it actually gets a real mix of people. So of that 35,000 I spoke about who ate with us last year, 41% of people paid under what it cost us to make. 19% paid the same of what it cost us to make, and 40% paid over. Now, there are people who pay nothing, and 1 in 12 people who come through our door pay nothing towards their meal. But that meal has been paid forward either by someone in our community who wants to make sure that someone can guarantee to eat, or by us. And it's no judgment. And when you create this space of trust and no judgment, people come. It's terrifying, but people just come, and you kind of fill this space with energy and life. And sometimes that's good energy, sometimes it's bad energy. It doesn't matter. It's energy. And then we kind of go again day after day. But it's very exciting.
Right. So is the customer group very diverse? And like, how is the interaction? What is sort of the profile of people like?
Sure. It's really everybody. I've been trying to work out, when you're got a project or a restaurant or a product, you try and say, okay, we're aiming it towards this kind of person or that kind of person. But actually, we've when people zig, we zag, right? It's around how do we do things differently, and actually, we make it for everybody. We do have to make sure that we work alongside maybe more marginalized groups with that opportunity of access. So we work with amazing local organizations such as Nelson Trust, who have 3 rehabilitation houses near us. We work with local community groups who either getting people down to eat with us, or how do we answer that question with them in their community? And sometimes that's through funding, sometimes that's through training, all sorts of things. But ultimately, we don't judge, and we don't kind of put barriers up for anybody. But additionally, we're unapologetic. Our offer isn't for everybody. And Tom, the founder, my very first day, I remember the thing he said to me in my interview was, you can't feed everybody. And that's a very tough thing when you're kind of in this industry. But if you kind of put that in mind, it means that if you take the fact that you can't feed everyone, what it means, it just focuses you on what you can do. And it focuses you on doing the right thing rather than pushing yourself too much and breaking a team. The long table at its simplest is a restaurant. That's it. In the past, people thought of us as a charity. People thought of us as like a posh soup kitchen. But we look at what the very best restaurants in the UK do. We look at how they cook, how they focus on hyper seasonal, hyper local food, and we create that and make that available to you, whether you've lost your job or you've lost your wallet.
Mm.
And we then allow the community to fill our tables, and then it's over to them. If you were to walk into the long table today, we're an old Victorian mill. I would say it's the shabby side of chic, but it's very beautiful. And we have these two massive long tables where we can seat 150 people. And when we're busy, you're almost forced to sit next to somebody you've never met before. And that's where the real work happens. The currency of communication with our customers, that's where the real magic happens.
Right, right, right. So I mean, you have people of very different social status that sit together and start discussing. I don't know if you have like you witnessed that yourself, interactions.
Yeah, and it's not just around our table who come to us, it's also within our team. So as you said, we employ everybody. So we have currently 25 people employed, and actually very excitingly, our head chef for our second restaurant is starting today as well. So I look forward to having her joining the team. And our team is made up of people from all sorts of backgrounds and demographics too.
Mm.
We have we have a placement scheme around work. So people who are really struggling, you may have had 3 kids and been out of work for 6 years and finding it hard to get back in. How do we help? We have people who work with us who are actively homeless, living in a tent at the moment, and they can't get a job. So we give them that opportunity. And so it's not just what we do to our customers, but to our staff. Um, we have genuinely had billionaires, bishops, and buskers sat around our table eating, and it doesn't matter who you are, you get the same service, you get the same meal, you get the same kind of seat at the table. There's no preferential treatment to who you are, and everyone sits and eats together. And kind of that's where we kind of unapologetically make things kind of complicated for those with means, maybe.
Any memorable stories of that, or you have anything in
Um,
mind, or?
there are if I went over the thousands of anecdotal kind of stories that we hear about day in, day out, it would sound unreal. It doesn't sound real. And sometimes you have to disbelieve it. You sometimes think, actually, have people missed the trick? Are we actually as good as people say we are? Um, and also, I'm also very wary that they maybe aren't my story to tell. A favorite, I will share one, a lady called Laura, and I'll only share this because we had an interview in the Independent in the UK, and she very kindly shared her time with that. So it can be read in the Independent if you want to Google that. But fundamentally, she had been out of work, and so she would come down to the long table on her own because she had no one to come with, and she knew that she wouldn't be turned away. Even if she came and sat and drank water, she knew she wouldn't be turned away, and she'd always be able to get a warm meal. And it was very cold, and she was by the fire, and a lady came and sat next to her, and they got talking. And Laura explained how she was unable to work, and she had lost her job because of a pretty debilitating back injury that she got when she was younger. And it just so happened, and this is where they don't sound real, just so happened this lady who sat next to her, who had come down to the long table for similar reasons, is a physiotherapist, kind of back specialist, that kind of thing. And she said, well, look, we're in the long table. Why don't I offer my work to you, pay as you can? I've never done this before. Why not? This feels like it's meant to be. Anyway, these two play ping pong now once a week after their sessions. And this person who was unable to work was kind of sofa surfing, was unable to move, is now in work, is now able to move. It's just, she came and told us a month ago, she's now just got secure accommodation for the first time in a while. And it breaks my heart that it takes for something that what we do to make that happen. That should just happen anyway. But
Yeah.
I can't speak for where you're based, but in the UK we are kind of pushed into this kind of isolation and this kind of otherness of people. And if you look at it the other way and you open it up and you just open yourself up and you trust people, there are some amazing stories.
Mm.
It's truly beautiful. And yeah, Laura's, I love seeing her, and she's a great hustler at ping pong. I don't know, she should be a professional one day, I'm sure.
Yeah. It seems to me like it is really the essence of the word hospitality. And
Mm. It's yeah, I mean, hospitality, Tom speaks around this a lot better, but hospital, you break it down, it's kind of a hospital. How do we look after people and feed people,
Mm.
right? It's nourishment is exceptional, and for those without means, I mean those with means as well, actually, how nourishing is the food we eat? How local is the food we eat? How much do our supermarkets and things like this actually work to make sure that we get the best proteins, the best starches, the best carbs, to you as an individual? They don't, is the short answer of that.
Right.
It's kind of profit before people. But for us, everything that we do and kind of all the people who we work with, all of our suppliers, it's not just around people being at the foremost, but planet as well. There's some work around kind of agricultural farming 4.0, regenerative agriculture, those kind of bits. But everyone we work with has a planet and a people story, and that's kind of what keeps us kind of in a framework of how we work with our suppliers, how we work with our customers, what we put on a plate. And yeah, it's evolving. It's always evolving, but that's where we look at the moment.
Because that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned supermarkets, and you sort of think, well, the often we see that the poorest of our society are the ones who have least access to quality proteins and quality
Yeah.
vegetables, fruits, and what have you. Sort of, it's the lowest, cheapest energy that they will buy, and that is the shit that you will buy in processed food.
Mm.
So, like with high sugar and trans fat levels. So
Mhm.
how do you get around that? I mean, you're working on I imagine on a quite a strict budget on your food
Mm.
cost. So I think
Yeah.
I think like, so how do you manage your food cost? And so what model do you have to sort of to keep a sustainable, healthy?
Well, we actually we socialize the cost of food. So if you, Ragnar, were to walk into the long table then it's your first time, we'd talk around how it works. But we would say that some people like a guide price. So last month it cost us £8.70 to make every meal. It's all ingredients, all kind of operational costs of the kitchen, staffing, and tax on top. Now that's not a guide price, it's just that's how much it costs us to make. Anything goes towards that. And so in the last month, we when it comes to protein's the most expensive thing, but we have to be really creative. So we invest in our food resilience team, the wonderful Emma and Alex, and their job is to work with the very best local producers. Again, what do big restaurants do? What do high-end restaurants do? And how do we do it in a way that we can make that food available? And a great example would be when it comes to our meat. So we buy animals whole that haven't been bred for their meat.
Mm.
It's a really interesting way. It's quite a
Yeah.
strange thing, but let me explain. So we buy pigs, we buy cows, and we buy mutton. We don't buy chicken. We can't guarantee provenance of chicken here in the UK. I don't know what's like where you are, but
Mm.
it's a murky, murky world.
Right.
And when it comes to this meat, we try and look for where the gaps are. So our pigs, for example, are from a farm called Whitcourt. It's a farm for city children. So it's a charity where inner city children go and raise these pigs and do all the vegetables and growing day in, day out. But 70% of the children that go to these places are Muslim, so they can raise the animals, but they can't eat them.
Mm.
So this rare breed, Gloucester Old Spot, incredible pigs that have the most amazing life, which might be on the open market, 800 quid. We pick up for less than half the cost of that
Mm.
because it wouldn't be sold otherwise, and we can then make that food available.
Mm.
Same thing with our cows. So our cows are in the UK, in the supermarket, your beef might be 1 year old to 2 year old max, and on the continent you're looking maybe up to 5 years. But the cows that we buy are anything between 6 and 11 years old,
Mm.
and we have these amazing commons around here, this common ground where the National Trust have these wildflower grazing cows that are used for conservation purposes. And when these cows come up to near the end of their life, they have multiple calves. We buy them whole, and these fat caps, these buttery, incredible beef. I don't know if you've seen it before.
Mm.
That
Mm.
kind of on the open market in the UK might be £30 a kilo plus. We're
Yeah.
looking at £4.50 a kilo. for
Right.
this beef because it's not being sold and there's no market for it, but we buy
Mm,
it and make it available. So
mm,
us investing in people to work with our suppliers and
yeah.
find those gaps means that we can make the best high-end food available to everybody, whether
Mm,
you have the money or not. There are some things which we will not buy. So we work with an organization called Hodmedods. Hodmedods are a British-based pulse and grain grower, but also manufacturer. So they do all the processing of that. So that means you haven't got to import chickpeas, you haven't got to do those kind of things. We work with amazing organizations like Wild Farmed. They've got some places in France as well, but Wild Farmed is a regenerative flour-based flour organization. So a lot of our bread flour comes from there. Good Small Farms. We love Good Small Farms. They're amazing. We've just done this memorandum of understanding with them where they're a very small pasture-led organic farm. But what we're doing is we're guaranteeing, I think it's 2 acres of their land purchasing. And again, being creative, we're not telling them what we want them to grow. They're telling us what they're going to grow, and we guarantee purchase of it, whatever it is. It's a bottom-up approach. Works with our producers, means they haven't got to sell out of town, county, country. And it means that we get to a price which works for both parties. And
mm,
then make it available to everyone because you may have had soup one day, or you may have had a beef rendang or a porchetta one day, but it costs the same because there is no cost to our food.
that's right.
Sounds
That's
very strange, but that's kind
oh,
of how
but,
we make it work.
yeah, it sounds like you have like a whole ecosystem built around the
Oh, we've had to create this. It's
your
taken a
food
long
chain.
time. I feel very lucky because I'm at the point now where we are turning a very small profit. We
Mm,
are not using grants or large form grants of over £100,000. Like nothing like that is happening, but people want to talk to us about it because we're almost there. It's wonderful.
exactly. And I mean, even like what is your thought on when we say that today almost 30% of all foods gets thrown away?
Mm.
You mentioned supermarkets, but I think also the hospitality industry and anybody has even families and homes are all guilty, industry and as a whole. How can we address that? Have you been working on food rescues and
Yeah, so we in the UK there aren't many food rescue agencies. I'll give a shout out to Everybody Eats, who are a restaurant group in New Zealand who do similar things to what we do, but they can access 36 food rescue agencies for free, whereas we pay penny on the pound for ours. But it's amazing. We last year did about 3.8 tons worth of food rescue. But then when it comes to our waste, what we then do is so last year we turned 2 tons of our cooked and raw food waste into our Rydan biodigester, which we then use to grow all of our herbs and chilies on site. So we have this real kind of circular economy way of looking at what we do here. But really interesting, Ragnar, I think it's around how you discuss food waste. And what I was really pleased to hear is we spoke around kind of what the individual does, but then we eventually got into the industry and the producers, and that's where the real change needs to happen.
mm,
So too often when we talk around food waste, we or when we talk about anything around this, we actually talk around the individual. What is the individual doing? What are you doing around your food waste? And what that does is that just takes the eyes off actually the people who are dictating
mm,
how the food gets to us. Most of the food waste actually happens way before it even gets into the ecosystem. The big multiple supermarkets will turn down things that aren't perfect, right?
mm,
And farmers are incentivized to grow things which tick these boxes or fit in these holes. And I get it. I understand that. My parents grew up I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and it was a pretty throwaway culture,
mm,
particularly over here. So I've seen it and I get it. But that's where the pressure I think needs to be put.
mm,
The supermarkets in the UK, we've got an election today in the UK. It's a pretty big day for us here. And or something that we spoke around is food banks, right? Food banks are opened, and supermarkets kind of gift food to them, and they make a big show of that about getting rid of wastes. But actually, fundamentally in the UK, it costs supermarkets more to destroy the food than it does to give it away.
Mm.
And the most disgusting fact that I have about food banks is there are now more food banks in the UK than there are branches of McDonald's.
Right.
And I don't know what it's like on the continent, but that is a revolting state for what we do here. And it's fed by, I think it's fed by supermarkets, it's fed by government, it's lauded when it opens, but it should be an absolute blight on our society. So um, food waste is hugely important, but we look at things slightly different. Food waste makes things possible for us, so we're really pleased to be able to take out of the system rather than put in. But I suppose the question I would pose to people who really are thinking about food waste is, let's say we manage to cook with all food waste, then what?
Mm.
What are we going to do then? For us, it's a part of the ecosystem rather than the core driver in the ecosystem. It's around creating a positive relationship with the whole hospitality industry and infrastructure rather than just one part of it.
Mm. I wonder how chefs or restaurants and chefs can be a change agent in influencing the manufacturers, the producers. As you said, chefs, well, they have an influence over consumers. They also get influence with what they buy and what they purchase, not to get pushed on them. Because as you say, you talk about big industry. Well, they are managing supply and demand.
Mm,
Sometimes for them, waste is actually a way to keep prices up.
mm.
And
Yeah, I mean, when we work with, so I mean, again, because we've had to be creative, we have found some gaps. So it's really worth, if you're like a chef patron and you have kind of full control around what you purchase, it's really great talking to your suppliers about their surplus, but actually buying surplus. Buying grade B, grade C, grade D, right?
yeah.
It should be valued. Just because it isn't perfect, it should be valued, and actually it creates much stronger bonds with your suppliers. So that's really worth looking at. And we, for the last few years now, have really kind of pushed that conversation with our suppliers.
Mm.
Um, and it means you get offered things more. As I said, I think bottom up is really important. I know it's very exciting to either have a changing menu or kind of have this as a seasonal menu or whatever. But the most seasonal way of doing it is actually talking to producers and seeing what is available. Not what would I like to cook. It's what is available and what do we then cook with that. Again, it means that we are, as an industry, a positive influence on our local food economy rather than a drain or a driver away.
Mm.
Again, I think you wouldn't expect your customers to tell you how to cook as a chef. We shouldn't tell our growers how to grow. I
Grow.
think that doing it.
Chef's role is to take what is in the nature close near to him and make great food out of that.
Yeah, and that's exciting, right? I think it's a different way of looking at it. It's slightly more you know, it's not always, it's very easy for me to say, but it's not always possible to do. But it's the theory is easier than the practice. I can guarantee you that. But then we come to the large multiples, right? And those which are driven by maybe organizations that have shareholders or venture capitals tied into it. And unfortunately, they are only in it to make money. Well, the chefs aren't, and the workers aren't, but the shareholders are only there to draw profit out of the industry. And as of yet, I haven't found a way to break that up. But
Yeah.
we'll work. Let's get this working, and we'll work on that one next.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a big chunk into working sustainably, whether it's in investing in your people or in the workforce and
Mm,
skills and how to work with your suppliers and
mm.
it's
I think, Ragnar, just because you mentioned it, I think it's really important to say as well. Many people listening would have maybe have come. If you're listening to this, you've either in the industry or you care about the industry, and hospitality, as wonderful as it is, has actually been very difficult for people to have families or to have work-life balances. And in the UK, we had your Gordon Ramsays of the world, kind of almost aggressive 90-hour weeks where you don't enjoy anything and you burn out was almost glamorized.
yeah.
And that's wrong. I think the industry is much better than that. And so again, it's really important for us to make sure that you create a space where you have exceptional work-life balances in what you do. And
Mm.
if you give people great ingredients and give people kind of the opportunity to be creative and to feed everybody, not just those who can afford it, and to be able to have a family, right? That's where you kind of get people and keep good people. And in an industry where turnover of staff is very difficult, we haven't lost a member of staff in at least over a year, maybe 18 months. Really lucky in that respect.
Excellent. So what is the future now of the long table? What's the and is expanding? You mentioned actually before you want to open another restaurant. How many remind us how many restaurants do you have, and what is the sort of the future vision look like?
Thank you. So yeah, so we currently have our one in Stroud. We've got a second one opening up in Cirencester, which is the capital of the Cotswolds, where we're based here. Some people may have heard of that. And it's in a big old department store that has been sat in the center of their town high street for the last 10 years, empty, rotting away, and we're going to bring it back to life. With probably over 60 people employed, not just through the long tail, but sister organizations in real living wage employment in their town centre, and making incredible products available to everyone for all. We are in early stage talks with looking in Bristol and opening one up in Bristol, but that might be next year or year after. And then who knows? I mean, we've just started doing some really wonderful collaborative projects with restaurants
Right.
as well. So talking to chefs, I can Matt Beardshaw, who runs who's a chef patron of Wilder in Nailsworth, which is a triple double A rosette, incredible place, 22 seats, tasting menu, that kind of thing. But he's worked with us in the past on various bits. During the pandemic, he cooked with us, and I think 2 weeks ago he opened his restaurant up, Pay As You Can. And rather than serving 22 people on a Thursday night, he served over 100 people. And, there are some nuances in how we do it, but how do we go into these traditional restaurant spaces and help draw people in, right, in a different way? It's very hard. It's very hard to change your model to what we do, because you have outgoings, you have costs, you have this, that, and the other. But there are ways that we can help draw people into restaurants. So we've got some really exciting conversations with some Michelin places and green Michelin places who are up for doing it in the next few months. So keep an eye on our socials and sign up to our newsletter for when that's coming up, because those are really exciting opportunities to eat together in places you may not have been able to have the opportunity to do before.
Absolutely, and we'll on the podcast page we'll put some links and share your social media channels so our chefs can follow what you're doing, and maybe they get some good tips and ideas, and we can get the snowball rolling and see if this can become a model for future hospitality industry, for restaurants, and a new way of working, a new way of looking at your profession.
That's very kind, Ragnar. I'd be if I didn't say, if you head to our website, which is thelongtableonline.com, if you'd like to buy a meal forward for somebody, you can do it through there. Also, a real great shout out to our friends of the Long Table. We have people who subscribe to their meals, so they pay for a meal a week and they come and get it. But if actually they can't come that week, that meal goes towards somebody else. And if you'd like to join that program, you're more than welcome to on our website as well.
Great ideas, and hopefully inspire some to because we have listeners in all over the world, and maybe inspire somebody to change their way of working in other countries as well, and supporting you and spreading the this amazing model.
Oh, honestly, get in touch. We are totally open book. You can go on Company's House and see our financials. But if you want to, if anyone wants to talk around how we make it work and you'll think about doing something, give me a call.
Excellent. Thank you, Will, for sharing your inspiring story and all the insights. It's really an eye opener, and I'm sure people would have a lot of interaction with the podcast. So I thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Ragnar. Amazing things happen when we eat together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for listening. You're listening to World Chefs Podcast. This is your host, Ragnar, and you're listening to World on a Plate. So see you next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.